Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Humiliation. The gold Lamborghini Huracan gleamed under the valet lights of Chateau Noir, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Mario Burt stood in his simple black suit, watching his wife Jasmine laugh with her father as they approached the entrance. Gerald McCarthy, oil tycoon and self-made billionaire, jangled his keys with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never been told no. My wife's rich dad threw his car keys at me. Go park my Lambo, boy. It's the closest you'll ever get to one, Gerald sneered, his weathered face twisted in amusement. The keys struck Mario's chest and fell to the ground with a metallic clink. Jasmine Burt, née McCarthy, covered her mouth as she giggled. Be careful, honey, he might scratch it. Her emerald dress sparkled as she turned to follow her father toward the mahogany doors. You know how clumsy you can be. Mario bent slowly to retrieve the keys, his jaw tight. 3 years of marriage, and she still treated him like the struggling construction worker she'd met at a charity gala. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that Mario Burt had clawed his way up from nothing to build an empire worth $200 million. He'd kept his wealth hidden, using shell companies and trust funds, watching and waiting. The manager, a thin man named Albert Hanna, rushed toward Gerald and Jasmine as they reached the entrance. Wait a minute, Albert called out, his voice carrying across the parking lot. Our owner is coming. Gerald paused, straightening his tie. About time. I've been waiting 3 months for this reservation. Then Mario entered through the main doors, having slipped inside through the staff entrance. The transformation was immediate. Gone was the submissive husband. In his place stood a man who commanded respect, whose presence filled the room. Albert bowed, slightly as Mario approached. Mr. Burt, Albert said formally, your table is ready, sir. Gerald and Jasmine turned pale as fresh snow. The keys to the Lamborghini felt heavy in Mario's palm as he smiled coldly at his wife and father-in-law. Welcome to Chateau Noir, Mario said, his voice carrying the authority of ownership. I believe you have a reservation under McCarthy. Gerald's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Jasmine's face drained of color, her emerald dress suddenly seeming too bright against her pallid skin. How? Gerald began. How what? Mario interrupted, stepping closer. How does the boy you just humiliated own the restaurant you've been dying to get into? How does the man you treat like hired help have enough money to buy your oil company 3 times over? The backstory was simple yet brutal. Mario had grown up in the foster system after his parents died in a car accident when he was 8. By 16, he was living on the streets. By 21, he'd built his first construction company with borrowed tools and sheer determination. By 25, he owned half the commercial real estate in the city. He'd learned early that people revealed their true nature when they thought you were beneath them. Jasmine had been different then, or so he'd thought. They'd met at a charity function for homeless youth. Ironic, considering she was now looking at him like he was a stranger. She'd been volunteering. He'd been the guest speaker. She'd seemed genuine, interested in his story, in him. They'd dated for 2 years before marrying in a simple ceremony. Mario had kept his wealth hidden, wanting to ensure her love was real. Now, watching her face cycle through shock, confusion, and something darker, he realized he'd been a fool. Mario! Jasmine's voice was barely a whisper. What's going on? What's going on, Mario said, tossing Gerald's keys to the actual valet, is that you've been living a lie for 3 years. Both of you. Gerald's face reddened. You let us think. I'll let you show me exactly who you are. Mario cut him off. And now I know everything I need to know. Inside the restaurant, Mario led them to a private dining room. The walls were lined with photos of Mario with senators, celebrities, and business moguls. Awards and certificates bearing his name covered one wall entirely. How long? Gerald demanded, sinking into his chair. How long have I been rich? Mario poured himself a glass of wine, leaving his guests empty-handed. Since before I met your daughter. How long have I known about her affair with Sean Vargas? 3 months. How long have I been planning what comes next? 3 months and 1 day. Jasmine's fork clattered to her plate. You know about Sean? I know everything about Sean. I know he's Gerald's business partner's son. I know he promised you a life your poor husband could never give you. I know you've been meeting him at the Meridian Hotel every Tuesday and Friday afternoon. Room 247. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. I know he's been feeding you lies about leaving his wife, about the two of you starting fresh somewhere exotic. What you don't know is that Sean's wife, Terry, is my business partner's daughter. Small world, isn't it? Gerald leaned forward. What do you want? Mario smiled, and it was the coldest expression either of them had ever seen. I want you to understand that the game has changed. You're not the players anymore. You're the pieces. As they sat in stunned silence, Mario excused himself to make a phone call. In a hallway, he dialed a number he'd memorized but never used. Dwight? It's Mario. Yes, it's time to begin. Chapter 2. The Discovery. The affair had started 4 months ago, but Mario had known about it for 3 months and 6 days. He remembered the exact moment, because it was the first time in his adult life that he'd felt completely powerless. He'd come home early from a business trip to surprise Jasmine, carrying flowers and a diamond bracelet worth more than most people's cars. The house was quiet, but her car was in the driveway. He'd climbed the stairs, already imagining her smile when she saw the gift. Instead, he'd heard them through the bedroom door. When are you going to leave him? Sean Vargas's voice carried through the thin walls of their modest home. Another lie Mario maintained to keep his wealth hidden. Soon, Jasmine had replied, her voice breathy with passion. I just need to figure out the best way. Mario's so pathetic, I almost feel sorry for him. Poor little construction worker, Sean had laughed. At least he's good with his hands, right? For manual labor, I mean. Their laughter had cut deeper than any physical wound. Mario had spent that night in his real home, a penthouse across town that Jasmine knew nothing about. He'd sat in his study, surrounded by monitors displaying his business empire, and planned their destruction. Now, 3 months later, the plan was in motion. Sean Vargas was everything Mario pretended not to be. Born into wealth, educated at Ivy League schools, married to Terry Osborne, daughter of one of the most powerful men in the state. Sean's father, Brian Wolf, was Gerald McCarthy's business partner in a massive oil drilling project in the Gulf of Mexico. What Sean didn't know was that Mario owned the drilling rights to the adjacent waters through a shell company. What Gerald didn't know was that his permits were about to be revoked due to environmental concerns that Mario had been carefully orchestrating for months. Back at the restaurant, Mario returned to find Jasmine crying and Gerald making angry phone calls. My lawyers say you can't do this, Gerald said without looking up. Do what? Mario asked innocently. Own a restaurant? Make money? Marry your daughter under false pretenses? Which part exactly can I do? You know what I mean? Mario sat down and cut into his steak. I'm afraid I don't. Please enlighten me. Gerald's face was purple now. You think you can destroy my business because my daughter made a mistake? A mistake? Mario chewed thoughtfully. Is that what we're calling a 4-month affair? How refreshingly modern of you. Jasmine looked up, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Mario, please. We can work this out. I love you. No, Mario said quietly. You love what you thought I couldn't give you. Security, status, money. The problem is I had all of those things. I just wanted to see if you could love the man instead of the wallet. He pulled out his phone and showed them a series of photos. Jasmine and Sean entering the hotel. Jasmine and Sean in compromising positions by the pool. Jasmine and Sean planning their future together. The private investigator was very thorough, Mario explained. He's also very discreet. For now, what do you want? Jasmine whispered. Mario leaned back in his chair. I want you to understand that every choice has consequences. Sean chose to seduce a married woman. You chose to betray your vows. Gerald chose to humiliate me publicly. Now you all get to live with the results. His phone buzzed. A text from Dwight Hoffman. Phase 1 complete. The permits are suspended pending investigation. Mario smiled. Gerald, I'd check your messages if I were you. Gerald's phone rang immediately. His face went from purple to ashen as he listened to the voice on the other end. Impossible, he muttered. We had all the proper documentation. Did you? Mario asked. Because I'm looking at a report that says there's been a significant oil spill in the area. Kill a lot of fish. The EPA is very upset. They're considering criminal charges. There was no spill. Gerald shouted. Wasn't there? Mario pulled up another file on his phone. Because I have photos, timestamps, water samples. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you own the testing company. The room fell silent except for Gerald's labored breathing. You fabricated evidence, Jasmine said, her voice hollow. I created leverage, Mario corrected. Sean's father, Brian, is about to lose everything because of this investigation. Sean's trust fund? Gone. His inheritance? Evaporated. His wife? Well, Terry's father doesn't like men who destroy the family business. Mario stood up and straightened his tie. You three have 36 hours to make your choices. Jasmine, you can file for divorce and walk away with nothing, or you can drag this out and I'll make sure every society page in the country knows about your affair. Gerald, you can publicly apologize for your behavior tonight, or you can watch your business empire crumble under federal investigation. And Sean? Jasmine asked. Mario's smile was arctic. Sean gets to learn what it feels like to lose everything he never earned in the first place. As Mario walked toward the exit, Albert approached with a concerned expression. Sir, is everything all right? Everything's perfect, Albert. Please ensure my guests have whatever they need. And Albert, send them the bill for tonight's dinner. All of it. The wine, the private room, the chef's special preparations. I think a $10,000 meal will help them remember this evening. Outside, Mario retrieved his phone and made another call. Wilson, it's time for phase 2. Yes, I want everything. Bank records, credit reports, social media accounts. I want to know every secret they've ever kept. The valet brought Mario's car around. Not the modest sedan Jasmine knew about, but a black McLaren 720S worth more than most people's homes. As he drove away from Chateau Noir, Mario felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The game was no longer about hiding who he was. Now it was about showing them exactly who they'd chosen to cross. Behind him, through the restaurant's windows, he could see 3 figures still sitting at the table, their world crashing down around them with the weight of their own choices. The real revenge was just beginning. Chapter 3. The Setup. Mario's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the Meridian Tower, a building he owned through one of his many shell companies. Ironically, it was the same hotel where Jasmine and Sean conducted their affair, just 40 floors above their usual meeting place. The next morning, Mario stood in his study watching the news. Channel 7 was running a story about the environmental disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, complete with aerial shots of oil-slicked water and dead marine life. The reporter, a woman named Cora McCarty, no relation to Gerald despite the name, was describing the worst ecological disaster in the region's history. Mario's phone rang. Dwight Hoffman's name appeared on the screen. The samples are holding up under scrutiny, Dwight reported. Our marine biologist confirms everything looks authentic. The EPA is moving forward with the investigation. And Brian Wolf? Panicking. He's been calling Gerald every 20 minutes since the story broke. Sean's trust fund has been frozen pending the outcome of the investigation. Mario nodded, watching a pelican struggle to fly with oil-covered wings. What about the hotel footage? Delivered to Terry Osborne this morning, along with a complete dossier on her husband's activities. Her father received a copy as well. Good. Have Wilson prepare the financial documents for Phase 3. I want Gerald's credit lines called in simultaneously. After ending the call, Mario showered and dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than Gerald paid his best employees in a month. He had meetings scheduled with 3 different city council members, a federal judge, and the mayor's chief of staff. By evening, Gerald McCarthy would understand the true meaning of powerlessness. The first meeting was with Earl Schultz, the city's longest-serving council member and a man who owed his political career to Mario's strategic donations. You're asking me to revoke permits on private property, Earl said nervously, reading through the documents Mario had provided. I'm asking you to enforce existing zoning laws, Mario corrected. Gerald's new downtown development violates height restrictions established in 1987. The fact that previous council members chose to overlook these violations doesn't make them legal. Earl shifted uncomfortably. This would shut down a $200 million project. That's not my concern. Following the law is. And the timing? Right after this oil spill business. Mario's expression didn't change. Coincidences happen, Earl. The question is whether you want to be on the right side of the law when this gets investigated. The threat was subtle but clear. Earl had taken bribes for years, never from Mario, but Mario had the evidence nonetheless. Sometimes being thorough meant collecting insurance policies you hoped never to use. I'll call an emergency session, Earl conceded. I thought you might see reason. The second meeting with federal judge Nathaniel Aguilar was more complex. Mario needed criminal charges filed against the Wolf-McCarthy Partnership for environmental crimes, but he also needed those charges to lead exactly where he wanted them to go. The evidence is compelling, Judge Aguilar admitted, reviewing the fabricated oil spill documentation. But federal environmental crimes require intent to prove willful negligence, which is why I'm providing this, Mario said, sliding a folder across the mahogany desk. Inside were emails between Brian Wolf and Gerald McCarthy discussing cost-cutting measures on safety equipment, dated 3 months before the supposed spill. The emails were forgeries, but they were perfect forgeries created by a team of specialists who usually work for intelligence agencies. How did you obtain these? The judge asked. A concerned whistleblower came forward, someone with access to internal communications who was horrified by what they saw. I'll need to verify their authenticity. Of course, I've included contact information for the whistleblower. He's prepared to testify under oath. The whistleblower was actually Grant Branch, a former Wolf-McCarthy employee who'd been fired for exposing safety violations 2 years ago. Mario had found Grant living in poverty, bitter and angry. For $50,000 and a new identity, Grant was happy to play his part in bringing down his former employers. By the time Mario finished his third meeting, Gerald McCarthy's world was collapsing at precisely the speed Mario had calculated. That evening, Mario sat in his penthouse study, monitoring multiple phone conversations through surveillance equipment that definitely violated federal law, but was completely untraceable. He listened to Gerald screaming at his lawyers, to Brian Wolf demanding explanations from the EPA, and to Sean Vargas begging his wife for forgiveness. The most interesting conversation was between Jasmine and her mother, Lynn Wade McCarthy. I don't understand how this happened, Jasmine was saying. Mario was nobody. He fixed things and carried heavy objects. How does someone like that become powerful enough to destroy Daddy's business? Maybe you should have paid attention to the man you married instead of the money you thought you wanted, Lynn replied coldly. You don't understand. Sean and I, we had plans. That is the operative phrase. Sean's wife threw him out this morning. His father disowned him this afternoon. His trust fund is frozen indefinitely. Whatever plans you had, I suggest you make new ones. I could go back to Mario, beg for forgiveness. For what your father tells me, Mario isn't the forgiving type. You made your choice, Jasmine. Now you get to live with the consequences. Mario ended the surveillance feed and poured himself a glass of whiskey that cost more than most people made in a week. Tomorrow would bring Phase 3, the complete financial destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. But tonight, he had a special visitor coming. The elevator chimed at exactly 9 o'clock. Terry Osborne stepped into Mario's penthouse, her designer dress perfectly pressed despite the emotional devastation of her day. Mr. Burt, she said formally, thank you for agreeing to see me. Mrs. Vargas, please sit down. Terry was everything Jasmine pretended to be, elegant, intelligent, and genuinely powerful in her own right. Her father, Jimmy Sears, owned the largest construction company in the state. She managed the business side of their empire while he handled the physical operations. I received your package this morning, she said without preamble. I thought you should know the truth about your husband. Why? Her brown eyes studied Mario intently. What do you gain from destroying my marriage? Your marriage was already destroyed. I just provided you with the evidence. Terry nodded slowly. I filed for divorce. Sean will get nothing. I assumed as much. But that's not why I'm here. She leaned forward slightly. I want to know what else you're planning. My family's business works closely with Wolf Construction. If they go down, we could be affected. Mario smiled. Finally, someone who understood how the game was really played. Your family's business will be fine. In fact, I have a proposition that might interest you. I'm listening. Gerald McCarthy is about to lose everything. His construction permits are being revoked, his oil partnership is under federal investigation, and his credit lines are being called in. Someone will need to take over his downtown development project. Someone like my father's company. Someone exactly like your father's company. For about 30 cents on the dollar. Terry's smile was sharp and predatory. And what do you want in return? Your husband has caused me considerable emotional distress. I think he should face the consequences of his actions in a very personal way. What kind of consequences? Mario stood and walked to his window, looking down at the city lights. Sean thinks he understands power because he was born into money. I want to learn what real power looks like. Meaning tomorrow morning, Sean is going to receive a visit from some very upset investors who believe he stole their money. They're going to be very persuasive in their demands for repayment. Terry was quiet for a long moment. You're talking about physical violence. I'm talking about education. Sean has lived his entire life without consequences. It's time he learned what happens when you take what doesn't belong to you. And if I don't help you, Mario turned back to face her. Then you get to watch your family's business suffer when Wolf Construction defaults on their contracts. Gerald's projects represent 40% of your father's revenue. If those contracts disappear, the threat hung in the air like smoke. What exactly do you need from me? Terry asked finally. Tomorrow afternoon, Sean will be desperate for money. He'll come to you begging for help, promising to change, swearing he'll do anything to fix what he's broken. I need you to send him to a specific location. Where? Mario wrote an address on a piece of paper and handed it to her. An abandoned warehouse in the industrial district. Tell him there's a businessman there who might be willing to help him out of his current difficulties. And then Sean learns what happens to people who steal what belongs to Mario Burt. Terry studied the address for a moment, then looked back at Mario. You're not just destroying their finances. You're destroying them completely. Yes. Good, she said, standing up. Sean humiliated me for months. Jasmine helped him do it. Gerald treated you like a servant. They all deserve whatever you have planned. As Terry left, Mario returned to his window. Below, the city sprawled out like a circuit board, millions of lights representing millions of lives. Tomorrow, 3 of those lives would change forever. Mario picked up his phone and dialed one final number. Jack, it's time. Yes, bring Abel and Carl. Make sure they understand. I want him scared, not dead. This isn't about killing him. It's about teaching him what real fear feels like. Phase 3 was about to begin, and Mario had no intention of showing mercy to anyone who had betrayed him. The boy who threw car keys at Mario Burt was about to meet the man who owned the keys to everyone's future. Chapter 4. The Trap Titans. Sean Vargas sat in his Porsche outside the abandoned warehouse, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. 12 hours ago, he'd been the heir to a construction fortune. Now he was a man with nothing, desperate enough to meet a stranger in the industrial district based on his estranged wife's recommendation. The morning had been a symphony of destruction orchestrated by Mario's careful planning. Sean's credit cards had been canceled simultaneously at 8 a.m. His bank accounts were frozen due to suspicious activity by 8:30. By 9 a.m., his father had disowned him publicly, releasing a statement to the press about cutting ties with family members who bring shame to the Wolf name. But the real blow had come at 10 a.m., when 3 men in expensive suits had visited Sean's downtown apartment. Jack Nichols was the kind of man who collected debts for people who preferred to remain anonymous. His associates, Abel Morse and Carl Richardson, specialized in making problems disappear permanently. They'd explained to Sean, in very clear terms, that he owed money to some very dangerous people. $500,000, Jack had said, settling into Sean's leather chair like he owned it. You borrowed it 6 months ago to cover some gambling debts. Now, these people want it back. I never borrowed any money, Sean had protested. Carl had smiled, pulling out a folder thick with documentation. Says here you did. Got your signature and everything. Even got witnesses. The documents were forgeries, but they were perfect forgeries. Sean's signature had been copied from the affair photos Mario had obtained. Hotel registrations, credit card receipts, anything with Sean's handwriting. The witnesses were real people Mario had paid to remember meetings that never happened. I want my money by midnight, Jack had continued. With interest. Call it 600,000, round numbers. I don't have that kind of money. Then you better find it. These people don't accept payment plans. Now Sean sat outside the warehouse, hoping the mystery businessman Terry had mentioned could somehow solve his problems. His phone buzzed with another threatening text from Jack. 11 hours left. Hope you like broken bones. Inside the warehouse, Mario watched Sean through security cameras he'd installed the week before. The building belonged to him, purchased through another shell company months ago, specifically for this purpose. It had been a clothing factory once, but now it was empty except for the carefully staged setup Mario had arranged. He's been sitting out there for 20 minutes, reported Wilson Klein, Mario's head of security. Think he's getting cold feet. He'll come in, Mario said confidently. Desperation is a powerful motivator. Wilson nodded toward the three men standing nearby. And if he tries to run, he won't get far. Brandon's watching the back exit. Ignacio's covering the side entrance. If Sean leaves this warehouse, it won't be the way he came in. Finally, Sean gathered enough courage to enter the building. The main door creaked open, echoing through the empty space. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through broken windows. Hello, Sean called out, his voice betraying his fear. Is anyone here? Terry said someone wanted to meet me. Mario stepped out of the shadows. No longer the humble construction worker, or even the restaurant owner from the night before. Now he wore a black tactical vest and dark jeans, looking like exactly what he was, a predator who had cornered his prey. Hello, Sean, Mario said quietly. Sean's face went white. You? But Terry said exactly what I told her to say. Surprised? You shouldn't be. When you destroy someone's marriage, you shouldn't expect their ex-wife to help you. Sean backed toward the door, but Brandon Bullock stepped into view, blocking the exit. All 6'4" of Brandon's frame filled the doorway completely. Going somewhere? Mario asked. What do you want? Sean's voice cracked like a teenager's. I want you to understand something very important, Mario said, walking closer. You spent 4 months thinking you were taking something from me. My wife, my life, my future. But what you were really doing was taking something from yourself. I don't understand. Your freedom, Mario explained patiently. Your safety, your future. See, when you decided to seduce my wife, you made an enemy. And I'm not the kind of enemy who forgives and forgets. Sean's eyes darted around the warehouse, looking for another exit. Look, I'm sorry about Jasmine. We can work something out. I'll pay you back somehow. Pay me back. Mario laughed, the sound echoing off the empty walls. You think this is about money? You think you can write a check and make this go away? Then what do you want? Mario pulled out his phone and showed Sean a video. It was security footage from the hotel where Sean and Jasmine had met, but the timestamp showed yesterday, long after Mario had revealed his true identity to them. This was taken 24 hours ago, Mario said. Even after you knew who I really was, even after you knew what I was capable of, you still met with my wife. You still thought you could take what was mine. In the video, Sean and Jasmine were arguing in the hotel parking lot. Their voices weren't audible, but their body language told the story clearly, Sean demanding that Jasmine leave with him, Jasmine refusing, Sean grabbing her arm roughly when she tried to walk away. You put your hands on her, Mario continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. You physically forced her to stay when she wanted to leave. That makes you something worse than an adulterer, Sean. That makes you an abuser. It wasn't like that. She was being unreasonable. She was trying to end a relationship that had become dangerous for everyone involved. You were trying to force her to abandon her entire life for a man who couldn't even stay loyal to his own wife. Mario nodded to Wilson, who handed him a manila folder. Let me show you what your future looks like, Mario said, opening the folder. Jack Nichols and his friends? They're real debt collectors. The $500,000 you supposedly owe? That's real too, as far as the legal system is concerned. He showed Sean the first document, a loan agreement bearing Sean's forged signature. The witnesses who will testify that you borrowed this money, they're real people with real identities and no criminal records. When they testify under oath that you borrowed money from the wrong people, who's going to believe your story about being framed? The second document was even worse. A police report filed that morning claiming Sean had assaulted a woman during a drug deal gone wrong. The woman was an actress Mario had hired, but her story would be convincing enough to add assault charges to Sean's growing legal problems. The beauty of this, Mario continued, is that none of it is technically illegal. The debt is real, even if it's fabricated. The witnesses are telling the truth about what they've been paid to remember. The assault charge is based on a real complaint filed by a real person. Sean sank to his knees on the dirty warehouse floor. Please, I'll do anything. I'll disappear. I'll never come back to the city. Just please don't do this. You had that option yesterday, Mario said coldly. You could have walked away when you realized who I was. Instead, you chose to double down. You chose to put your hands on my wife and demand that she choose between her marriage and her safety. Mario's phone buzzed with a text message. He smiled as he read it. Good news, he told Sean. Your father just declared bankruptcy. The federal investigation into the oil spill has expanded to include all of Wolf Construction's projects for the past 5 years. Turns out you've been cutting corners on safety regulations for a long time. That's impossible. We follow all safety protocols. Do you? Because I have employees who are willing to testify otherwise. Former employees who were fired for reporting safety violations. Employees who have very detailed records of conversations with your father about saving money by ignoring regulations. The truth was that Wolf Construction had been cutting corners, just not to the extent Mario's witnesses would claim. But the real violations provided enough foundation to make the fabricated ones believable. Grant Branch sends his regards, by the way, Mario added. He's particularly looking forward to testifying about the time your father told him to shut up or find another job when he reported structural weaknesses in the Meridian Tower Foundation. Sean's face went completely white. The Meridian Tower? But that's where hundreds of people live and work every day, yes. Imagine how the families will feel when they learn their homes and offices might collapse because Brian Wolf wanted to save money on concrete. The Meridian Tower was structurally sound. Mario owned it and had had it inspected thoroughly. But Grant's testimony would plant enough doubt to force a complete evacuation and reconstruction, costing the Wolf family everything they had left. Your father will spend the rest of his life in federal prison, Mario continued. Your mother will lose the house, the cars, everything. Your sister Kelly Mills will have to explain to her children why Grandpa is a convicted criminal. My sister has nothing to do with this. Neither did I, until you decided to take what was mine. Mario walked to where Sean knelt on the floor and crouched down to meet his eyes. Here's what's going to happen, he said quietly. In 1 hour, Jack Nichols is going to find you. He's going to collect the money you owe, one way or another. If you don't have it, and you won't, he's going to break both your legs and dump you outside the city limits. You can't do this. I could do whatever I want. I have more money than you ever dreamed of, more connections than you can imagine, and more patience than you deserve. I spent months planning this moment, and I'm going to savor every second of watching your world burn. Mario stood up and walked toward the exit. Oh, and Sean, when you're sitting in that hospital bed with your legs in casts, thinking about how your life went wrong, remember this. I gave you a chance to walk away. You chose to stay and fight. Now you get to live with the consequences. As Mario reached the door, Sean called out desperately. What about Jasmine? What are you going to do to her? Mario paused and looked back. Jasmine made her choice. She chose you over me, chose excitement over stability, chose what she thought would make her happy over what actually would. Now she gets to discover what life with nothing looks like. She loves you. No, Mario said sadly. She loved what she thought I couldn't give her. She never bothered to find out who I really was. Just like you never bothered to find out what I was really capable of. The warehouse door slammed shut behind Mario, leaving Sean alone with his fear and the approaching sound of footsteps from the shadows. Jack Nichols stepped into the light, cracking his knuckles with a sound like breaking bones. "Time to pay up," Jack said cheerfully. "Hope you've got good health insurance." Outside, Mario climbed into his McLaren and drove away without looking back. Phase 3 was complete. Phase 4 would be even more personal. It was time to deal with Jasmine. Chapter 5. Confrontations and Emotional Depth. Jasmine Burt stood in the kitchen of the modest home she'd shared with Mario for 3 years, staring at the divorce papers that had been delivered that morning. The house felt different now. Smaller, shabbier, like a costume she'd outgrown. Everything that had once seemed charming about their simple life now felt like evidence of the lies they'd been living. Her phone buzzed with another news alert about her father's business troubles. The headlines were getting worse. Environmental disaster linked to construction fraud. Wolf McCarthy partnership under federal investigation. Billionaire Gerald McCarthy declares bankruptcy. She tried calling Mario 17 times since leaving the restaurant the night before. Each call went straight to voicemail. Each voicemail was the same. "Mario, please call me back. We need to talk. I can explain everything." But what was there to explain? That she'd fallen in love with another man because she thought her husband was poor? That she'd laughed when her father humiliated him because she was embarrassed by what she thought was his low status? That every day of their marriage had been built on her assumption that she was settling for less than she deserved? The front door opened, and for a moment Jasmine's heart leaped. But it wasn't Mario. It was Lynn Wade McCarthy, her mother, looking older than Jasmine had ever seen her. "Pack your things," Lynn said without preamble. "The bank is foreclosing on this house tomorrow." "What?" "But this is our home. Your home belongs to a shell company owned by your husband." Apparently, Mario has been paying the mortgage for 3 years. Now that he's filing for divorce, he's terminating the lease. Jasmine sank into one of the kitchen chairs she'd thought they'd bought together at a second-hand store. Now she wondered if it was actually worth more than her car. "How much of our life was a lie?" she asked. "All of it," Lynn replied bluntly. "The struggling construction worker, the modest income, the financial stress you thought you were living under, all lies. Your husband is worth more money than your father ever was." "But why? Why would he hide that from me?" Lynn pulled out her phone and showed Jasmine a news article from 3 years ago. Local business magnate Mario Burt announces anonymous donation to Foster Youth Foundation. The photo showed Mario in an expensive suit, shaking hands with the charity's director. The caption identified him as reclusive millionaire Mario Burt, whose construction empire has transformed the city's skyline. "This was taken 2 months before you met him," Lynn said. "He was already rich when you started dating. He chose to hide it from you." "But why would he do that?" "Maybe he wanted to see if you could love him for who he was instead of what he had. Apparently, you failed the test." The words hit Jasmine like physical blows. She remembered their early dates. Mario talking about growing up in foster care, about working construction jobs to pay for night school, about dreaming of building something meaningful. She'd been charmed by his stories, moved by his struggles, impressed by his determination to succeed despite his circumstances. But she'd also been secretly relieved when Sean entered her life, offering her the lifestyle she'd grown up expecting. Sean's wealth was visible, obvious, comfortable. He took her to expensive restaurants, bought her designer clothes, promised her a life of luxury that her poor husband could never provide. "Have you heard from Sean?" Lynn asked. "Not since yesterday. His phone goes straight to voicemail." Lynn's expression darkened. "You might want to turn on the news." The local evening news was running a story about a man found beaten in an abandoned warehouse. The victim was identified as Sean Vargas, son of prominent businessman Brian Wolf. He was alive, but in critical condition with 2 broken legs, a fractured skull, and internal injuries. Police believe this was connected to gambling debts, the reporter was saying. Mr. Vargas was reportedly involved with loan sharks who became violent when he couldn't repay what he owed. Jasmine's hands shook as she reached for her phone. She dialed Mario's number again, and this time he answered. "Hello, Jasmine. Did you do this?" she whispered. "Do what?" "Sean. The warehouse. The beating. Sean made some poor financial decisions. I had nothing to do with the consequences. You're lying. Am I? Can you prove I was anywhere near that warehouse? Can you prove I know anything about his gambling debts? Can you prove I've done anything except discover that my wife was cheating on me? Jasmine closed her eyes. Mario, please. We need to talk. We are talking. In person. Face to face. I need to see you. There was a long silence. Finally, Mario said, fine. One conversation. Tonight at 9 o'clock. The penthouse at Meridian Tower. The hotel where you and Sean met for 4 months, yes. Fitting, don't you think? The line went dead. At 9 o'clock, Jasmine stood outside the penthouse elevator, using a key card Mario had left for her at the front desk. Her hand shook as she pressed the button for the top floor. The elevator opened into a foyer more luxurious than any home she'd ever seen. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that belonged in museums. This was Mario's real life, the life he'd hidden from her completely. Impressive, isn't it? Mario's voice came from the living room. Jasmine walked toward the sound and found him standing by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. He was wearing dark jeans and a black sweater, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him in months. How long have you lived here? She asked. 5 years. Since before we met. And you never told me. I never told you a lot of things. He turned to face her. Just like you never told me about Sean. Jasmine looked around the penthouse, at the expensive furniture, the state-of-the-art electronics, the art collection worth more than most people's homes. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me think we were struggling financially? Because I wanted to know if you could love Mario Burt the person, not Mario Burt the bank account. And now you know? Yes, now I know. They stood in silence, the weight of 3 years of deception hanging between them. I did love you, Jasmine said finally. The person, I mean, in the beginning. Did you? Or did you love the idea of rescuing someone from poverty? Did you love feeling superior to the man you were helping to succeed? The question cut deep because it contained truth. Jasmine remembered the satisfaction she'd felt when coworkers praised her for marrying down, for choosing love over money. She'd enjoyed being seen as selfless, as someone who cared more about character than wealth. When did it change? Mario asked. When Sean started paying attention to me. When he showed me what my life could be like if I was with someone who could give me the things I grew up with. The things I could have given you all along. But you didn't. You chose to lie to me, to make me think we couldn't afford nice things, to let me worry about money every month. I wanted you to love me without the money. And I wanted to be loved for who I was, not because I passed some test you designed without telling me about it. They were both shouting now, 3 years of hidden resentments finally erupting. You cheated on me, Mario said. You lied to me. Jasmine shot back. I lied about having money. You lied about loving me. I did love you. You loved what you thought I was becoming. You loved the project of improving me. But when someone offered you a finished product, you jumped at the chance. Jasmine sank onto one of the leather sofas, tears streaming down her face. What happens now? Now you learn what life is like without safety nets, Mario said coldly. Your father's business is gone. Sean's family has disowned him. Your trust fund was tied to your father's company, so that's gone too. And you. I have everything I had before I met you, plus a very expensive education about the true nature of the woman I married. I'm sorry, Jasmine whispered. I'm so sorry, Mario. I made a terrible mistake. You made a choice. Multiple choices. Every day, for 4 months, you chose to betray our marriage. Every Tuesday and Friday, you chose to come to this hotel and pretend to be someone else. Every night, you came home and lied to my face about where you'd been. I can change. We can start over. Mario walked to his desk and picked up a folder. Do you know what this is? Jasmine shook her head. These are bank records for an account in the Cayman Islands. Sean's been moving money there for 6 months, skimming from his father's business to prepare for your life together. Jasmine's face went white. That's impossible. Sean wouldn't steal. Wouldn't he? He stole another man's wife. Why not another man's money? Mario showed her the records. Transfers totaling nearly $2 million, all traced back to Wolf Construction accounts. The federal investigation into the oil spill, they're going to find this money. When they do, They're going to want to know how much you knew about Sean's theft. I didn't know anything. Can you prove that? Because you're the beneficiary of this account. Your name is on the signature cards. According to these records, you helped Sean steal money from his father's company to fund your future together. The documents were more of Mario's careful forgeries, but they were convincing enough to destroy what remained of Jasmine's life. You're framing me, she said. I'm showing you the consequences of your choices. You chose Sean over me. Sean chose theft over honesty. Now you both get to live with the results. Jasmine stood up, anger replacing despair. You're destroying innocent people. Innocent. Mario laughed bitterly. Your father threw his car keys at me and called me boy. You laughed at his humiliation. Sean seduced another man's wife and put his hands on her when she tried to leave. Which one of you is innocent? We made mistakes. You made choices. Every decision was deliberate. Every betrayal was calculated. Now you want forgiveness because the consequences are more severe than you expected. Mario walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. I spent months planning this, Jasmine. Months learning about your father's business, about Sean's family, about every vulnerability I could exploit. Do you know why? Because you're a monster. Because I loved you. Because I gave you everything I had, my trust, my heart, my future, and you threw it away for a man who promised you things I already owned. He turned back to face her. The Mario you married would have forgiven you. He would have fought for your marriage, gone to counseling, tried to rebuild what you'd broken. But that Mario was an illusion. I'm the real Mario, and I don't forgive betrayal. What about mercy? What about second chances? What about loyalty? What about honoring your vows? You didn't give me a second chance when Sean showed interest. You gave up on our marriage the moment something better came along. Jasmine walked to the elevator, her heart breaking with each step. At the doors, she turned back one final time. I hope someday you'll understand that destroying us won't fix what's broken inside you, she said. And I hope someday you'll understand that some betrayals can't be forgiven, Mario replied. The elevator doors closed between them, sealing the end of their marriage and the beginning of Jasmine's new reality. Mario stood alone in his penthouse, surrounded by the wealth and power he'd hidden from the woman he'd loved. For the first time since discovering the affair, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his loss. He'd won. Gerald, Sean, and Jasmine were all facing consequences they'd never recover from. But victory felt hollow when the person you'd wanted to share it with was the one who'd forced you to fight. Outside the windows, the city stretched endlessly, full of lights and possibilities. But for Mario Burt, the view would never look the same. He'd learned that love without trust was worthless, that wealth without someone to share it with was just numbers in a bank account. He'd also learned that some lessons were worth any price, even if that price was your own happiness. The game was almost over. Only one move remained. Chapter 6, The Turning Point. 3 days after Sean's beating, the first cracks in Mario's perfect plan began to show. He was in his study reviewing financial reports when Wilson Klein burst through the door without knocking, something that had never happened in their 5-year working relationship. "We have a problem," Wilson said, his usual calm demeanor replaced by visible agitation. "Define problem." Wilson placed a tablet on Mario's desk. The screen showed a local news broadcast featuring a woman Mario didn't recognize, a blonde reporter standing outside the abandoned warehouse where Sean had been attacked. "This is Cheryl Farrell from Channel 12 News," the reporter was saying. "I'm standing outside the warehouse where Sean Vargas was brutally beaten 3 days ago. But new evidence suggests this wasn't a random attack by loan sharks. We're joined now by private investigator Art Wiggins, who has been investigating the case independently." Mario's blood went cold. Art Wiggins was good, too good. If he was involved, someone had hired him specifically to uncover the truth. "Mr. Wiggins," the reporter continued, "what can you tell us about your investigation?" Art Wiggins was a thin man with sharp eyes and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of uncovering other people's secrets. "Ms. Farrell, we've discovered that Sean Vargas's so-called gambling debts may have been fabricated. The men who allegedly attacked him, Jack Nichols, Abel Morse, and Carl Richardson, have all worked for the same employer in the past 6 months. Can you tell us who that employer is?" a private security company called Fortress Solutions. And Fortress Solutions has only one client, a shell company called Meridian Holdings. Mario's jaw tightened. Meridian Holdings was one of his companies, but it should have been impossible to trace. The ownership structure was buried under layers of legal protection that had cost him millions to establish. Mr. Wiggins, the reporter pressed, are you suggesting that someone hired these men to attack Sean Vargas? I'm suggesting that this wasn't about gambling debts. This was about revenge. Wilson paused the video. It gets worse. He swiped to another news segment, this one featuring Gerald McCarthy standing outside a federal courthouse. Despite his financial ruin, Gerald still commanded presence when he spoke to cameras. I want to be very clear about something, Gerald was saying. My family is being targeted by someone with significant resources and a personal vendetta. The oil spill that destroyed my business, the permit revocations that shut down my construction projects, the criminal charges against my partner. None of these are coincidences. Are you suggesting a conspiracy, Mr. McCarthy? Asked the reporter. I'm suggesting that when a man's entire life collapses in 72 hours, you look for patterns. And the pattern here points to one person. My son-in-law, Mario Burt. Mario leaned back in his chair. How did they connect me to Fortress Solutions? Art Wiggins is thorough, Wilson replied. He traced the payments through 3 different banks and 2 offshore accounts. It took him 60 hours, but he found the connection. And Gerald's not stupid. He put together the timeline and realized the oil spill evidence appeared right after you revealed your true identity. He's hired his own investigators. Mario stood and walked to his window. Below, the city hummed with its usual activity, but he felt like he was watching it from inside a glass cage that was slowly closing around him. What's our exposure? He asked. Criminal? Probably minimal. Everything we did was technically legal, just morally questionable. Civil? That's another story. If they can prove you orchestrated the fake oil spill, Gerald could sue for damages. How much? Everything. Your entire fortune. Mario's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed a number he didn't recognize, but something told him to answer it. Mr. Burt. The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. Who is this? Guadalupe Wright, investigative reporter for the Tribune. I'm working on a story about the recent events involving the McCarthy and Wolf families. I was hoping you might comment. I have no comment. Really? Because I have some very interesting information about Fortress Solutions, Meridian Holdings, and a series of financial transactions that seem designed to target specific individuals. Mario's grip tightened on the phone. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. I also think you might want to meet with me before I publish this story. It could be very damaging to a lot of innocent people, such as your employees, for instance. Fortress Solutions employs 37 people, most of them former military with families to support. When this story breaks, they'll all be unemployed and unemployable. The threat was subtle but clear. Mario could destroy Gerald, Sean, and Jasmine, but the collateral damage would extend to dozens of innocent people. Where do you want to meet? Mario asked. Cafe Luna, downtown. 1 hour. The line went. Mario turned to Wilson. Give me everything we have on Guadalupe, right? Background, employment history, financial records, family members, everything. Already working on it, Wilson replied, typing rapidly on his laptop. Former investigative reporter for the Washington Post. Won a Pulitzer for exposing government corruption. Moved to local news 3 years ago after her editor was murdered while investigating organized crime connections to city officials. Murder? Car bomb. Very professional job. Wright blamed herself for getting him involved, took a job here to get away from the pressure. Mario nodded. So she's not easily intimidated, and she's very good at what she does. If she's investigating us, she's already found more than we want her to find. 40 minutes later, Mario sat across from Guadalupe right in a corner booth at Cafe Luna. She was younger than he'd expected, probably mid-30s, with intelligent dark eyes and the kind of focused intensity that came from years of digging up buried truths. Thank you for meeting with me, she said, opening a thick folder. Let's skip the pleasantries. What do you want? I want to understand why a successful businessman would go to such elaborate lengths to destroy 3 people. I have no idea what you're talking about. Guadalupe smiled and pulled out a photograph. It showed Mario entering the abandoned warehouse 2 hours before Sean was found beaten. Security camera from the building across the street, she explained. Amazing what technology can capture these days. Mario studied the photo. That proves I was in the area. It doesn't prove I was involved in any assault. No, but this does. She showed him another photo. Jack Nichols leaving the same warehouse 30 minutes after Mario had entered. Still circumstantial. True. But when you combine it with financial records showing payments from Meridian Holdings to Fortress Solutions and testimony from 3 witnesses who saw you meeting with Jack Nichols last week, the picture becomes clearer. Mario leaned forward. What witnesses? Employees at your restaurant. Seems you forgot about the security cameras in your own establishment. The mistake was elementary, and Mario cursed himself for not thinking of it. He'd been so focused on monitoring his targets that he'd forgotten to protect himself. What do you want? He asked. I want the story. Why did you do it? What drove a successful man to commit elaborate acts of revenge against his own family? It's not a story you'd understand. Try me. Mario looked around the cafe at the normal people living normal lives and realized how far he'd fallen from the man he used to be. My wife cheated on me, he said simply. Men get cheated on every day. They don't usually respond by destroying entire businesses and having people beaten. They do when they've spent their entire life learning that showing weakness gets you destroyed. Mario found himself talking, the words spilling out like water through a broken dam. He told her about the foster system, about learning to hide his emotions as a survival mechanism. He told her about building his fortune through sheer determination, about meeting Jasmine and thinking he'd finally found someone who could love him for who he was underneath the money. So you hid your wealth to test her love, Guadalupe said. I wanted to know if she could see past the surface. And when she failed the test, you decided to punish everyone involved. I decided to show them consequences. Gerald humiliated me because he thought I was poor. Sean seduced my wife because he thought I was weak. Jasmine betrayed me because she thought I couldn't give her what she wanted. All of them made the same mistake. They judged me based on what they saw, not who I was. Guadalupe was quiet for a long moment, making notes in her reporter's notebook. You realize what you become, don't you? She asked finally. Enlighten me. The very thing you accuse them of being. You've judged them based on their worst moments instead of who they really are. Gerald's an arrogant man, but he built his business from nothing just like you did. Sean made a terrible choice, but he's not a criminal. Jasmine betrayed you, but she's not a monster. They destroyed my marriage. No, Mr. Burt, you destroyed your marriage the moment you chose deception over honesty. Everything that happened after that was just consequences. The words hit Mario like physical blows. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I've seen this story before. Powerful man feels betrayed, uses his resources to destroy the people who hurt him, justifies it by calling it justice. The only difference is the scale of your revenge. What's your point? My point is that you're about to lose everything you've worked for. And for what? To prove that you're more powerful than people who already know they're weaker than you. Guadalupe pulled out another folder, this one even thicker than the first. Gerald McCarthy has filed a civil lawsuit against you for $200 million. Sean Vargas's wife has filed criminal charges for conspiracy to commit assault. The FBI is investigating the fake environmental evidence you used to destroy Wolf Construction. You can't prove any of that. I don't have to. The investigators you didn't know about have already proven it. Art Wiggins has been feeding information to federal agents for 3 days. They have recordings, photographs, financial records, and witness testimony. Mario felt the walls closing in around him. What do you want? I want you to end this. Call off your dogs, admit what you've done, and face the consequences like the man you claim to be. And if I don't, then you'll face the consequences anyway, but you'll have destroyed even more innocent people in the process. Mario stood up to leave, but Guadalupe's next words stopped him cold. Your wife tried to kill herself last night. The coffee shop seemed to spin around Mario as he sank back into his seat. She's alive. Guadalupe continued quickly. Her mother found her in time, but she left a note apologizing for ruining your life, apologizing for not being worthy of the man you really were. You're lying. I'm not. Jasmine Burt is currently in the psychiatric ward at Metropolitan Hospital on suicide watch. She blames herself for everything that's happened to her father and Sean. Mario's carefully constructed armor of righteous anger cracked completely. She cheated on me. Yes, she did. And now she's so consumed with guilt and self-hatred that she tried to end her own life. Is it the kind of justice you were looking for? I never wanted her to. Mario's voice trailed off. To what? To suffer? To feel pain? To understand what it's like to lose everything you care about? Because that's exactly what she's experiencing. Mario buried his face in his hands. I just wanted them to understand what they'd done to me. They understand. Gerald has lost his business and his reputation. Sean is facing criminal charges and may never walk normally again. Jasmine is in a psychiatric hospital wishing she was dead. How much understanding do you need? I don't know how to stop it. Yes, you do. You started this with a plan. You can end it with a plan. The question is whether you're brave enough to admit you were wrong. Mario looked up at Guadalupe Wright, this stranger who had somehow become his confessor. What happens if I come forward? What happens if I admit everything? You face criminal charges. You lose most of your money. You probably go to prison. But you also stop the cycle of destruction before it claims any more victims. Including myself? Especially yourself. The man I'm talking to right now isn't the same man who built a fortune from nothing. That man was driven by hope and determination. You're driven by hatred and revenge. Which one do you want to be? Mario closed his eyes and saw Jasmine as she'd been on their wedding day. Radiant, hopeful, full of love for the man she thought she was marrying. She'd been wrong about who he was, but maybe he'd been wrong about who she was too. I need time to think, he said. You don't have time. The federal agents are planning to arrest you tomorrow morning. Your only choice is whether you surrender voluntarily or wait for them to come get you. Mario stood up and walked toward the exit. At the door, he turned back to Guadalupe. Why do you care what happens to me? Because I've seen what revenge does to people. It destroys the person seeking it even more than it destroys the targets. I don't want to write another story about a man who had everything and lost it all because he couldn't forgive. Maybe some things can't be forgiven. Maybe. But maybe the person who needs forgiveness most is you. Mario walked out into the evening air, his mind spinning with possibilities and consequences. For the first time in months, he wasn't sure what his next move should be. Behind him, Guadalupe Wright watched through the cafe window as Mario Burt faced the most important decision of his life. The game was about to end, but who would win remained to be seen. Chapter 7. Mario's Revenge Unfolds. Mario sat in his penthouse study at 3 in the morning, surrounded by monitors displaying security feeds from across the city. Federal agents were already positioning themselves around the building. He could see them in the parking garage, in the lobby, on the street corners. They thought they were being subtle. His phone buzzed with a text from Wilson. Charges being filed in 6 hours. Last chance to disappear. Mario stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. Running wasn't an option. He'd built his entire life on the principle that actions had consequences, and now it was time to face his own. But first, he had one final move to make. He opened his secure laptop and began typing commands that would activate the last phase of his plan, a phase he'd hoped never to use, but had prepared nonetheless. If he was going down, he wouldn't go down alone. The first command transferred $50 million from Gerald McCarthy's frozen assets back to the accounts they'd been taken from. The federal investigation had seized Gerald's money based on Mario's fabricated evidence, but the seizure had been legal. Now Mario was returning what had been stolen through legitimate legal channels. The second command released a comprehensive dossier to every major news outlet in the country. The files contained detailed evidence of actual corruption within the Wolf Construction Company. Not the fabricated environmental crimes Mario had created, but real safety violations that Brian Wolf had covered up for years. Mario hadn't needed to create evidence against Wolf Construction. The real evidence had been there all along, hidden in employee complaints and safety reports that had been buried by company lawyers. Mario had simply chosen to use fake evidence because it was faster and more dramatic. Now, the real evidence would surface, ensuring that Brian Wolf faced genuine consequences for legitimate crimes. The third command was more personal. It activated a trust fund that would provide for Sean Vargas's medical expenses and rehabilitation costs. The money came with conditions. Sean would have to complete therapy for his gambling addiction and abusive behavior, and he could never contact Jasmine again. But it would ensure that he recovered physically from the beating Mario had orchestrated. The fourth and most important command initiated a complete financial transfer. Every shell company, every hidden asset, every penny of Mario's fortune would be consolidated into a single trust fund with Jasmine as the sole beneficiary. The transfer was irrevocable and would take effect the moment Mario was arrested. He wasn't doing this out of love or forgiveness. He was doing it because Guadalupe Wright had been right about one thing. Jasmine's attempted suicide was more consequence than he'd intended to create. Mario's computer chimed as the final transfer completed. In 6 hours, when the federal agents arrived, they would find a man worth exactly nothing except for the clothes on his back and the criminal charges against him. But before that happened, he had one last conversation to conduct. The Metropolitan Hospital psychiatric ward was heavily secured, but Mario had been visiting patients in various hospitals for years through his charitable foundation. Getting inside required only a phone call to the night administrator. "Mr. Burt," said Dr. Angelina Valdez, the attending psychiatrist. "I have to say, I'm surprised to see you here. How is she?" "Stable. The suicide attempt was serious. She would have died if her mother hadn't found her. But she's responding well to treatment." "Can I see her?" Dr. Valdez hesitated. "That depends. Are you here as her husband or as the man who's been systematically destroying her life for the past week?" "Both, I suppose. She's very fragile right now. If you're here to cause more damage, I'm here to end it." Dr. Valdez studied Mario's face for a long moment, then nodded. "Room 314. 10 minutes only." Jasmine looked smaller than Mario remembered, sitting by the window in a hospital gown with her hair pulled back and no makeup. She turned when he entered, and her expression cycled through shock, fear, and something that might have been hope. "Mario, why are you here?" "I came to tell you something important." He sat in the chair across from her bed. "In about 5 hours, federal agents are going to arrest me for conspiracy, fraud, and a dozen other charges. I'll probably spend the next 10 years in prison. I don't understand. I fabricated evidence to destroy your father's business. I hired men to beat Sean. I created fake debt records and false witness testimony. I committed multiple federal crimes, and now I'm going to face the consequences." Jasmine stared at him in silence. "But before I go to prison," Mario continued, "I wanted you to know that you're going to be financially secure. Everything I own, every company, every property, every investment is being transferred to a trust fund in your name. I don't want your money. It's not about what you want. It's about what you need. You'll have enough to take care of your mother, to help your father rebuild his life, to pay for Sean's medical expenses if you choose to." "Why would you do this?" Mario looked out the window at the sunrise beginning to paint the sky. "Because I realized something last night. The man you fell in love with 3 years ago, the one who told you stories about growing up in foster care and working construction jobs, he was real. He was just richer than you knew. Mario, the man you cheated on, the one who hid his wealth and tested your love, he was an imposter. I created him because I was afraid you couldn't love the real me. The real you. A man who grew up believing that everyone would eventually abandon him. A man so terrified of being hurt that he hurt everyone else first. A man who spent months planning elaborate revenge because he couldn't face the simple truth that his marriage failed because he never trusted his wife enough to be honest with her." Jasmine wiped tears from her eyes. "I did love you. The person, not the money. I fell in love with your stories, your dreams, your determination. I fell in love with the man who came from nothing and built something meaningful. But you fell out of love when things got difficult. I fell out of love when I started feeling like I wasn't enough for you. Like you were settling for me because you thought you couldn't do better. That's not true, isn't it? You never told me about your real life, your real friends, your real interests. You played a role for 3 years, and I was just a prop in your performance. Mario realized she was right. He'd been so focused on testing her love that he'd never given her the chance to love the real him. I made a lot of mistakes, he admitted. We both did. The difference is that my mistakes destroyed people's lives, and my mistakes destroyed our marriage. They sat in silence, watching the sun rise over the city they'd both called home for 3 years without ever really knowing each other. What happens now? Jasmine asked. Now I go to prison and you get to start over. With money this time, but without the baggage of being married to a man who doesn't know how to trust anyone. I don't want to start over. I want to figure out how to fix what we broke. Mario smiled sadly. Some things can't be fixed, Jasmine. Some mistakes have permanent consequences. Are you asking for forgiveness? I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling you that I understand now why you did what you did. I understand that living with someone who hides who they really are is its own kind of prison. And I understand that betraying someone who trusted you with their heart is its own kind of murder. Mario stood up to leave. Take care of yourself. Take care of your mother. And if you want to help Sean recover, the money will be there. Mario, wait. He paused at the door. In 10 years, when you get out of prison, would you want to have coffee sometime? Just to see who we've become. Mario looked back at the woman he'd loved and betrayed and destroyed and saved, all in the span of a single week. Ask me in 10 years, he said. Maybe by then I'll know how to answer that question. As Mario walked through the hospital corridors toward the exit, his phone buzzed with updates from the automated systems he'd set in motion. Gerald's assets were being unfrozen. Sean's medical trust was being established. Jasmine's inheritance was being finalized. By the time the federal agents arrived at his penthouse, Mario would have nothing left except the truth about what he'd done and why he'd done it. Outside the hospital, the sun was fully up, and the city was coming to life. Mario drove through the streets he'd conquered and was about to lose, thinking about the choices that had brought him to this moment. He'd started this week as a man with everything, wealth, power, and a wife he thought loved him. He was ending it as a man with nothing except the knowledge that some victories cost more than they're worth. His phone rang one last time. Wilson's name appeared on the screen. They're moving in, Wilson reported. 5 minutes out. Good, Mario said. It's time. Any regrets? Mario thought about Jasmine in her hospital bed, about Gerald learning to live without his empire, about Sean facing recovery and redemption. Ask me in 10 years, he said, and hung up the phone. The final phase of Mario Burt's revenge was complete. He destroyed his enemies and himself with equal efficiency. Now came the hardest part, learning to live with the consequences. Chapter 8, Final Confrontations. The federal courthouse was a fortress of granite and glass that had witnessed the downfall of corrupt politicians, organized crime bosses, and white-collar criminals for over 50 years. On a gray October morning, it would add Mario Burt to that list. The media circus outside was spectacular. News vans lined the street. Reporters shouted questions at anyone entering the building, and protesters held signs calling for justice. The story of the wealthy businessman who had orchestrated elaborate revenge against his cheating wife and her family had captured national attention. Inside the courthouse, Mario sat at the defendant's table wearing an orange jumpsuit that marked him as a man who had fallen from the highest heights to the lowest depths. His lawyer, a public defender named Mike Herring, shuffled through papers with the resigned expression of a man who knew his client was guilty of everything the government accused him of. Last chance to consider a plea deal, Mike whispered. The prosecutor is willing to accept 15 years if you allocate to all charges. No, Mario said quietly. I want a trial. Mario, you confessed to everything. You provided the evidence against yourself. There's no defense here. There doesn't need to be a defense. I just want the whole story told. In the gallery behind him, Mario could see the faces of everyone his actions had affected. Gerald McCarthy sat in the front row, looking older but somehow more solid than he had before losing his fortune. Lynn Wade McCarthy sat beside him, holding the hand of her daughter. Jasmine was there, released from the hospital, but still pale and fragile. She wore a simple black dress and kept her eyes fixed on her hands, as if looking at Mario would cause physical pain. Sean Vargas sat in a wheelchair near the back, his legs still in casts but his eyes clear and focused. Beside him sat Terry Osborne, now Terry Sears again, having reclaimed her maiden name after the divorce was finalized. The prosecution's case was devastating in its thoroughness. Federal prosecutor Brandon Bullock methodically laid out every element of Mario's conspiracy, from the fabricated environmental evidence to the orchestrated assault on Sean Vargas. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Bullock said in his opening statement, this case is about a man who possessed immense wealth and power, and who used both to systematically destroy the lives of people who had wronged him. The defendant didn't just seek justice, he sought vengeance, and he didn't care who got hurt in the process. Bullock presented the financial records showing payments to Fortress Solutions, the forged documents used to frame Gerald McCarthy's business, and the fabricated loan agreements that had led to Sean's beating. He called witnesses who testified about Mario's meetings with Jack Nichols and his associates. The most damaging testimony came from Art Wiggins, the private investigator who had unraveled Mario's conspiracy. The defendant's plan was comprehensive and ruthless, Wiggins testified. He spent months studying his targets, identifying their vulnerabilities, and creating elaborate scenarios designed to cause maximum damage to their lives and reputations. In your professional opinion, Bullock asked, was this the work of someone seeking justice or someone seeking revenge? Revenge, Wiggins answered without hesitation. Justice involves the legal system and proportional consequences. This was personal destruction carried out with criminal methods. When it came time for the defense, Mike Herring called only one witness, Mario himself. Mr. Burt, Herring began, you've confessed to conspiracy, fraud, and multiple other federal crimes. Why are you here today instead of accepting a plea agreement? Because I want people to understand what happened and why it happened. Tell the jury about your childhood. Mario described growing up in the foster system, the abandonment and abuse he'd endured, and the lessons he'd learned about survival and trust. He talked about building his fortune through determination and sacrifice, and about meeting Jasmine at a time when he thought he'd finally found someone who could love him for who he was. Why did you hide your wealth from your wife? Because I wanted to know if she could love Mario the person instead of Mario the bank account. I'd seen too many relationships where money was the real attraction. And when you discovered the affair, I felt like everything I'd feared about relationships had come true. That people would always choose someone better when they had the option. So you decided to get revenge. I decided to show them what consequences looked like. Gerald humiliated me because he thought I was poor. Sean seduced my wife because he thought I was weak. Jasmine betrayed me because she thought I couldn't give her what she wanted. I wanted them to understand that they'd misjudged me. Do you regret what you did? Mario looked out at the gallery, meeting the eyes of each person his actions had affected. I regret that innocent people were hurt. I regret that my employees at Fortress Solutions lost their jobs. I regret that Jasmine was so consumed with guilt that she tried to take her own life. But do you regret seeking revenge against the people who wronged you? No, Mario said simply. I regret that I felt it was necessary. The prosecutor's cross-examination was brutal and efficient. Mr. Burt, you've testified that you wanted people to understand consequences. Let's talk about those consequences. Gerald McCarthy lost his business and nearly lost his life savings. Was that a proportional response to him treating you disrespectfully at a restaurant? No. Sean Vargas suffered serious injuries that will affect him for the rest of his life. Was that a proportional response to him having an affair with your wife? No. Your wife attempted suicide because of the guilt and shame you caused her to feel. Was that a proportional response to her infidelity? No. Then why did you do it? Mario was quiet for a long moment. Because I could. Because I had the power to destroy them. And I convinced myself that they deserved it. And now? Do you still believe they deserved what you did to them? I believe they deserve consequences for their actions. I don't believe they deserved the specific consequences I chose to impose. What's the difference? The difference is that consequences should teach lessons and promote justice. What I did was punishment designed to satisfy my own anger. So you're admitting that your actions were motivated by revenge rather than justice? Yes. And you're admitting that you used your wealth and power to harm people who were weaker than you? Yes. No further questions. During closing arguments, the prosecutor painted Mario as a dangerous man whose wealth had allowed him to act as judge, jury, and executioner in his own personal vendetta. The defendant wants you to feel sorry for him because he had a difficult childhood and because his wife cheated on him. But millions of people have difficult childhoods and betrayals in their marriages. They don't respond by orchestrating elaborate criminal conspiracies to destroy the people who hurt them. The defense's closing argument was simple and direct. Mario Burt did terrible things for understandable reasons. He's not asking for your sympathy or your forgiveness. He's asking for your understanding. He's a man who built something meaningful from nothing, who opened his heart to someone he thought he could trust, and who discovered that trust was misplaced. His response was wrong, but his pain was real. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Judge Nathaniel Aguilar scheduled sentencing for the following week, but he addressed Mario directly before dismissing the court. Mr. Burt, I've seen a lot of criminal defendants in my courtroom over the years. Most of them try to justify their actions or minimize their responsibility. You've done neither of those things. You've accepted full responsibility for your crimes and shown genuine remorse for the harm you caused. However, acceptance of responsibility doesn't erase the gravity of what you did. You used your considerable resources to systematically destroy multiple lives because your feelings were hurt. That kind of abuse of power cannot be tolerated in a civilized society. The judge paused, looking directly at Mario. I hope that when you get out of prison, you'll use your intelligence and determination for something more constructive than revenge. As the bailiffs led Mario away in handcuffs, he looked back one final time at the gallery. Gerald McCarthy was watching him with an expression that might have been respect. Sean Vargas was talking quietly to his physical therapist about his recovery timeline. Jasmine met his eyes across the courtroom and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Mario wasn't sure what she was thanking him for. The money he'd left her, the confession that had ended their mutual torment, or the lessons they'd both learned about the price of deception and betrayal. Maybe it didn't matter. Some conversations were too complex for words anyway. As the courtroom doors closed behind him, Mario Burt began the next phase of his life, learning to live with the consequences of choices that had seemed so clear when he was planning them, and so complicated now that they were irreversible. The man who had once controlled everything was about to discover what it meant to control nothing except his own response to the circumstances he'd created. It would be the hardest lesson of his life. Chapter 9, Brutal Conclusion. 22 months later, Mario sat in the visiting room of Federal Correctional Institution Oakdale, a medium-security prison in Louisiana where white-collar criminals serve their sentences alongside drug dealers and bank robbers. He'd been expecting this visit for weeks, ever since Jasmine had written to tell him she was coming. She looked different, stronger, more confident, wearing clothes that suggested financial stability but not ostentation. Her hair was shorter, and there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage, self-knowledge. "You look good," Mario said as she sat across from him at the metal table. "Prison suits you," she replied, studying his face. "You look more like the man I thought I married." Funny how losing everything can clarify your perspective. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, 2 people who had once shared a bed and a life now separated by more than just the table between them. "How's your father?" Mario asked. "Dead," Jasmine said simply. Mario's face went white. "What?" "Heart attack 6 months ago." The stress of losing everything, the shame of the scandal, the guilt about how he treated you, it all caught up with him. "I'm sorry," Mario said, and meant it. "Are you? Because this is what you wanted, isn't it? All of us destroyed, all of us paying for what we did to you." "No, I never wanted Gerald to die. But you're not surprised that he did." Mario looked down at his hands, which had once signed checks worth millions and now belonged to a man whose entire world consisted of a 6 by 8 foot cell. How's your mother? Managing. The money you left me has been enough to take care of her, to pay for Dad's funeral, to help Sean with his medical bills. You're helping Sean? I'm helping Sean because that's what decent people do when someone is suffering, even if that someone hurt them. The judgment in her voice was clear, and Mario felt it like a physical blow. Tell me about Sean, he said. He'll never walk normally again. The beating you arranged damaged his spine. He uses a cane now, and he'll need surgery for the rest of his life. And his family? His father died in federal prison 8 months ago. Suicide. Brian Wolf couldn't handle the shame of the environmental charges and the financial ruin. Another death. Another consequence Mario hadn't intended, but should have anticipated. Sean's mother moved to Florida to live with her sister. Jasmine continued. His sister, Kelly, lost her house when the family business collapsed. Her children had to change schools, lost their friends, started over in a different state. You're here to make me feel guilty. I'm here to make you understand what your revenge really cost. Jasmine pulled out a folder and placed it on the table between them. These are the consequences you didn't plan for, she said. 37 employees of Fortress Solutions who lost their jobs when your company was shut down. 14 families who lost their homes. 6 children who couldn't go to college because their parents' savings were wiped out. She opened the folder to reveal photographs and documents. This is Martinez Rodriguez. He worked security for you for 3 years. When Fortress Solutions collapsed, he couldn't find another job because of the criminal investigation. His wife left him, took their 2 children. He's been homeless for 8 months. Mario stared at the photograph of a man he remembered as dedicated and professional. This is Elvira Davison. She was an accountant for one of your shell companies. When the FBI investigation revealed that the company was a front, she was blacklisted from the accounting profession. She's working as a cashier at a grocery store now, making 1/10 of what she used to earn. More photographs, more stories of lives destroyed by the collateral damage of Mario's revenge. And this, Jasmine said, pulling out a final photograph, is what your revenge did to me. The photograph showed Jasmine in the hospital after a suicide attempt, pale, hollow-eyed, connected to machines that had kept her alive when she'd wanted to die. You didn't just punish the people who wronged you, she said. You punished everyone connected to them. You punished their families, their employees, their children. You became the thing you accused us of being, someone who destroyed innocent people to satisfy your own desires. I know, Mario said quietly. Do you? Because I don't think you really understand what you've done. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice intense but controlled. My father died, believing he was a failure who had destroyed his family's legacy. Sean's father died, believing he was a criminal who had betrayed everyone who trusted him. Those men died carrying guilt for crimes they didn't commit, shame for mistakes that were manufactured by your elaborate revenge plot. They made real mistakes too. Yes, they did. My father was arrogant and cruel to you. Sean was selfish and destructive. But their real mistakes were human failings, not the monstrous crimes you convinced them they'd committed. And you? Mario asked, what were your real mistakes? I fell in love with the idea of being noble instead of falling in love with you. I married someone I thought I was saving instead of someone I thought was my equal. And when someone else offered me a different kind of love, I chose betrayal instead of honesty. Jasmine's voice softened slightly. But you know what my biggest mistake was? I spent 3 years living with someone who never trusted me enough to show me who he really was. I was married to a stranger who was testing me without telling me there was a test. So we're both responsible for destroying our marriage. We are. But only one of us responded by destroying innocent people. Mario was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of what Jasmine was telling him. Why are you here? He asked finally. What do you want from me? I want you to understand that your revenge is still happening. Every day, people are suffering consequences from choices you made in anger. Children are going hungry because their parents lost jobs at companies you destroyed. Families are broken because you decided that everyone connected to your enemies deserved to be punished. What do you want me to do about it? I want you to stop it. I'm in prison. I can't stop anything. You can. You have almost 6 years left on your sentence. When you get out, you'll still be young enough to rebuild your fortune. The question is what you'll do with it. Jasmine pulled out another document, a proposal for a foundation that would provide assistance to the families affected by Mario's conspiracy. I've drawn up plans for a charitable foundation, she said. It would provide job training for displaced workers, college scholarships for children whose families lost their savings, counseling services for people dealing with the trauma of financial ruin. You want me to fund this with money I don't have. I want you to commit to funding it with money you'll earn after you're released. I want you to spend the rest of your life trying to repair the damage you caused instead of being proud of how effectively you destroyed your enemies. Mario studied the proposal, reading through detailed plans for assistance programs and rehabilitation services. And if I refuse, then you continue being the monster you became. You serve your sentence, get released, rebuild your fortune, and go back to being a man who values power over people. Is that what you think I am? A monster? I think you're a man who had the capacity for great good or great evil, and who chose evil when he was hurt. The question is whether that choice was permanent or whether you're capable of choosing differently. What about forgiveness? Mario asked. What about mercy for someone who made terrible mistakes? Forgiveness isn't something you ask for, Jasmine replied. It's something you earn through your actions. Mercy isn't something you deserve because you've suffered consequences. It's something you demonstrate by how you treat other people. She stood up to leave, gathering her papers. I'm not asking you to forgive yourself, Mario. I'm asking you to stop making other people pay for your pain. And if I do this, if I commit to your foundation, if I spend the rest of my life trying to make amends, what then? Do we have that coffee you mentioned in the hospital? Jasmine looked down at the man she'd once loved, the man who had loved her and destroyed her and saved her in the span of a single week. Ask me in 6 years, she said, after you show me who you really choose to be. As she walked toward the exit, Mario called after her. Jasmine, she turned back. I'm sorry. For all of it. For the lies, for the revenge, for the pain I caused you and everyone else. I know you are, she said. The question is whether you're sorry enough to spend the rest of your life proving it. The visiting room door closed behind her, leaving Mario alone with the weight of consequences he was still learning to understand. That night, in his cell, Mario read through Jasmine's foundation proposal again. The estimated cost was staggering, nearly $100 million over 20 years. It would require him to rebuild his fortune with the specific purpose of giving it away to the people his revenge had harmed. It would be a different kind of empire than the one he'd built before, not designed to accumulate power, but to repair damage. Not built on the principle that everyone would eventually betray him, but on the hope that some mistakes could be forgiven through sufficient effort to make amends. Mario pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. To the Board of Trustees of the Consequence Foundation, he began, naming Jasmine's proposal for the first time. I commit to funding this organization upon my release from federal prison. This letter constitutes a legally binding agreement that 25% of all income one earned for the remainder of my life will be donated to assist the families affected by my criminal conspiracy. He signed the document and sealed it in an envelope addressed to Jasmine. It wasn't redemption. Redemption couldn't be purchased with money or promises. But it was a beginning, a first step toward becoming someone who created more than he destroyed. Outside his cell window, the Louisiana night was dark and quiet. Mario had 6 years and 4 months left to serve. 6 years and 4 months to think about the man he'd been and the man he wanted to become. For the first time since his arrest, he had something to look forward to besides his own freedom. He had the possibility of earning something more valuable than wealth or power. The right to forgive himself for the choices that had brought him to this place. The boy who had thrown car keys at him would never again have that power over Mario Bird. But the man who had caught those keys would spend the rest of his life learning what real strength looked like. It wouldn't be the ending Mario had planned when he started his elaborate revenge, but it might be the ending he deserved. Time would tell. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Frank Delacroix stood at attention in his dress uniform one last time, watching the flag fold with military precision. 25 years in Army intelligence, followed by 15 years in private security consulting. 40 years of service to country and family. And now they were handing him a gold watch and a pension. The retirement ceremony took place in the base's oak-paneled hall, filled with colleagues, subordinates, and what he'd thought was his loving family. Rita, his wife of 22 years, sat in the front row wearing the diamond necklace he'd bought her for their anniversary. Their son Trevor, 21 and fresh out of college, checked his phone constantly. Their daughter Madison, 19, seemed more interested in her Instagram than her father's final military moment. Frank had built everything for them. The sprawling house in the suburbs, private school educations, Rita's wellness center that she'd opened 3 years ago. He'd sacrificed deployments, missed birthdays, endured the loneliness of military life, all so they could live comfortably. But Frank Delacroix hadn't survived psychological operations in 3 different theaters by being naive. For the past 6 months, he'd known exactly what Rita was doing. The discovery had been accidental. A text message that popped up on her iPad while she was in the shower, left carelessly on their kitchen counter. Can't wait to be free of the old soldier. Tonight was amazing. B. Boyd Hutchins, Rita's yoga instructor turned business partner. 12 years younger than Frank. All smooth charm and calculated manipulation. Frank had conducted surveillance operations on enemy combatants with less thoroughness than he'd applied to uncovering his wife's affair. He'd installed software on her devices, placed GPS trackers, even rented apartments across from Boyd's loft to photograph their encounters. Rita thought she was clever, but she was an amateur playing against a professional who'd spent decades in intelligence gathering. The affair had been going on for 8 months, but the real betrayal went deeper. Through financial records and intercepted communications, Frank had discovered Rita and Boyd's ultimate plan. Divorce him immediately after retirement, take half his assets, and use his pension to fund their new life together. They'd even involved the children. Trevor had been promised Frank's vintage car collection if he supported the divorce. Madison had been told she could redecorate the house however she wanted once Frank was gone. As the ceremony concluded and people began mingling, Frank felt a familiar calm settle over him. It was the same feeling he'd experienced before every major operation in his military career. Everything was about to change, but he was ready. Rita approached with that smile he'd once found beautiful, now seeing it for what it was, a weapon. "Honey, we need to talk privately," she said, gesturing toward a side room. Frank nodded. "Of course." Chapter 2. The Betrayal. The side room was small and windowless, typically used for private briefings. Rita had chosen it well, isolated, soundproof. Trevor and Madison followed them in, both wearing expressions Frank had never seen before. Cold, calculating, strangers wearing his children's faces. "Frank," Rita began, her voice taking on a tone he'd never heard. Confident, almost predatory. "We need to discuss your retirement plans." She reached into her purse and withdrew a thick manila envelope. "These are divorce papers. I'm filing immediately." "And these," she produced another envelope, "are foreclosure documents on the house." Frank remained perfectly still, his expression neutral. Years of interrogation training had taught him to reveal nothing. "The house is underwater on the mortgage," Rita continued, her voice gaining strength. "My business partner Boyd has found some irregularities in your finances. Tax liens, unpaid debts you've been hiding from me. The house has to go." Trevor laughed, a sound that cut through Frank like shrapnel. "Should have seen this coming, old man. Mom's been planning this for months. You think we didn't know about your secret bank accounts? Your gambling debts?" Frank's eyes narrowed slightly. Gambling debts? There were no gambling debts. But he said nothing. Madison chimed in with vicious satisfaction. 40 years for nothing. Boyd showed us everything. You've been lying to us our whole lives about money. Rita leaned forward, her mask completely dropped now. We're taking a house, and you get nothing. Boyd and I are starting fresh, and the kids support us completely. You can keep your precious military pension. It's barely enough to rent an apartment anyway. She slid the papers across the small table. Sign them. Make this easy on everyone. Frank looked down at the documents. The divorce papers were standard, but the foreclosure documents were interesting. According to these papers, the house had been refinanced multiple times, with loans taken out in his name that he'd never authorized. Debts to companies he'd never heard of. Financial obligations that painted him as either a compulsive gambler or a man living far beyond his means. This wasn't just adultery and greed. This was fraud. Rita and Boyd had forged his signature on loan documents, created false financial records, and built a case to make him look financially irresponsible. They weren't just stealing his life, they were destroying his reputation. Frank picked up the pen Rita offered. Okay, he said simply. The words seemed to deflate some of Rita's anticipated drama. She'd clearly expected begging, anger, threats. Instead, Frank began signing documents with the same methodical precision he'd once used to sign operation orders. That's it, Trevor asked, sounding almost disappointed. No fight? No pleading? Frank looked up at his son. No, at the young man who'd helped plan his destruction. What would be the point? He signed the last document and stood. I'll pack a bag and be gone within the hour. As he reached the door, Rita called out, Frank? Your pension checks will be direct deposited to the joint account until the divorce is finalized. We'll need that money to cover the house payments until we can sell. Frank paused, but didn't turn around. Of course. Chapter 3. The Departure. Frank's packing was efficient and deliberate. One military duffel bag containing clothes, his medals, a few personal items, and one particular file folder he'd been preparing for months. He moved through the house he'd paid for, past the furniture he'd bought, under the roof he'd provided, feeling like a ghost in his own life. Rita and Boyd were in the kitchen, sharing a bottle of champagne and speaking in hushed, excited tones about their plans. Trevor was on the couch, already looking through car magazines, planning how to sell Frank's restored 1967 Mustang. Madison was upstairs, probably planning her room renovation. None of them looked up as Frank walked out the front door for the last time. He drove to a hotel across town, checked in under a false name he'd established months ago, and opened his laptop. The real Frank Delacroix, the one who'd spent 25 years in psychological operations, was finally going to work. Rita thought she'd discovered his secret finances. In reality, she'd found exactly what he'd wanted her to find. Fake accounts, fabricated debts, false records he'd created specifically to support her narrative. She thought she was playing him, but she'd been playing into his hand from the moment she'd decided to betray him. Frank opened his encrypted files and began making phone calls. The first was to his lawyer, not the family attorney Rita knew about, but a specialist in criminal defense who'd been briefed on Frank's situation months ago. The second call was to a private investigator who'd been documenting every illegal transaction Rita and Boyd had made using Frank's forged signature. The third call was to a former military colleague who now worked in federal banking investigation. By the time Frank closed his laptop 2 hours later, several investigations were about to begin. Rita and Boyd had committed multiple federal crimes: identity theft, bank fraud, mortgage fraud, and forgery. They'd used Frank's military credentials to secure loans, forged his signature on documents, and created a paper trail that would destroy them both. But that was just the beginning. Frank's real plan was far more sophisticated than simple criminal prosecution. He'd spent 6 months creating a web of financial instruments, shell companies, and legal structures that would systematically dismantle everything Rita and Boyd thought they'd stolen. The house they believed they were taking? Frank had quietly restructured the mortgage through a company he controlled. They'd be making payments to him, unknowingly, while he collected evidence of their fraud. Boyd's assets? Frank had invested in the companies Boyd owed money to, gaining enough influence to call in debts at the worst possible moment. Rita's wellness center? Frank had discovered Boyd had been embezzling from it to fund their affair. When that information became public, along with evidence of the forged loans, both their personal and professional reputations would be destroyed. But Frank wasn't finished. He'd learned that Boyd had done this before, seduced wealthy women, manipulated them into financial fraud, then disappeared when the heat got too intense. There were 3 other victims in different states, women who'd lost their homes and savings to Boyd's schemes. Frank had contacted them all. They were very interested in testifying against Boyd and Rita as co-conspirators. As Frank lay on the hotel bed that night, he thought about the phone calls that would start coming soon. Rita would realize she'd walked into a trap. Boyd would discover his carefully constructed new identity was crumbling. Trevor and Madison would learn that their inheritance was funded by crimes they'd helped enable. But Frank Delacroix had learned something in 40 years of service. Patience was the most devastating weapon of all. Chapter 4. The First Tremor. 1 week after Frank's departure, the first cracks began to show. Rita stood in the kitchen of her newly acquired home, staring at a certified letter from Morrison & Associates, a law firm she'd never heard of. The letter was addressed to Frank, but since he'd signed power of attorney over to her, another document she believed she'd cleverly manipulated him into signing, she opened it. Dear Mr. Delacroix, our client, Pinnacle Financial Services, has requested immediate payment of the outstanding balance on account hashtag 4471-89X. Per the terms of your agreement dated March 15th, failure to maintain required payments triggers a full acceleration clause. The entire principal amount of $347,000 is now due within 30 days. Rita's hands shook. $347,000? She'd never heard of Pinnacle Financial Services, and March 15th was during the time she thought Frank was falling for her tricks. She called Boyd immediately. We have a problem. Boyd arrived within an hour, his usual confident swagger replaced by nervous energy. What kind of problem? Rita showed him the letter. Boyd's face went pale as he read. This doesn't make sense, he said. We traced all of Frank's accounts. There was no loan this big. Unless he was hiding more than we thought, Rita said, her voice rising. Maybe the gambling debts were real. Maybe. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for Sunrise Bank, where they'd applied for the mortgage transfer on the house. Mrs. Delacroix, this is Janet Harrison from Sunrise Bank. We need to discuss some irregularities in your mortgage application. Rita's stomach dropped. What kind of irregularities? The documentation you provided appears to have been altered. We're going to need to verify all signatures with your husband present. Can you have him come in this week? Rita hung up and immediately dialed Frank's number. It went straight to voicemail. Meanwhile, across town, Trevor was experiencing his own crisis. He'd gone to the DMV to transfer ownership of Frank's Mustang, only to discover the car was registered to a company called Delacroix Holdings, not to Frank personally. The clerk informed him that he'd need corporate authorization to transfer the title. But it's my father's car, Trevor protested. According to our records, sir, this vehicle is corporate property. You'll need to contact the company's legal department. Trevor called the number provided, reaching an automated system that eventually connected him to a law office. The attorney who answered was polite but firm. I'm sorry, but Mr. Delacroix specifically instructed us that no family members are authorized to access corporate assets without his written permission. Where is my father? Trevor demanded. I'm not authorized to provide that information. Madison was facing her own problems. She'd attempted to use one of Frank's credit cards to buy new furniture, only to discover the account had been frozen. When she called the credit card company, they informed her that the account holder had reported potential fraud and requested a security hold on all transactions. By evening, the 3 conspirators were gathered in Rita's kitchen, each bringing their own piece of bad news. It's like he knew, Rita said, pacing. Like he planned this. Boyd shook his head. That's impossible. Frank's a simple soldier. He doesn't have the sophistication to set up something this complex. Then explain this. Rita slammed down another letter that had arrived that afternoon. It was from the IRS, requesting documentation for unreported income in Boyd's name. Income that appeared to be connected to Rita's business. Boyd stared at the letter. I never received unreported income from your business. I know that, and you know that, but someone's been reporting payments to you. Large payments. For the past 6 months. Trevor looked up from his phone. Guys, we have bigger problems. I just got a call from my bank. They're freezing my accounts, pending an investigation into suspicious deposits. What suspicious deposits? Rita asked. Apparently, someone's been depositing money into my account from offshore companies. Money I never received, but the paper trail says I did. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Frank hadn't just discovered their plan. He'd been building a counterplan. Every move they'd made, every document they'd forged, every lie they'd told, had been anticipated. Rita's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check your email. She opened her laptop and found a message with no text, just a video attachment. When she clicked play, she saw herself and Boyd in his apartment, discussing their plans to frame Frank for gambling debts. The timestamp showed it was from 3 months ago. Another message arrived. This is just the beginning. Boyd stood up abruptly. I'm leaving town. Tonight. You can't leave, Rita said desperately. We're in this together. No, Boyd said, backing toward the door. You're in this. I was never married to him. I can disappear. But as Boyd reached for the door handle, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother's number from Arizona. Boyd, honey, are you in some kind of trouble? 2 men in suits came by asking about you. They said they were federal agents. Boyd's face went white. He looked at Rita, then at Trevor and Madison. He's not just coming for us, Boyd whispered. He's destroying everything we ever touched. Chapter 5. The Tightening Noose. Frank sat in his hotel room, monitoring multiple computer screens showing bank accounts, legal documents, and surveillance footage. 3 weeks had passed since he'd signed the papers, and his trap was working perfectly. Rita had made 7 desperate calls to his phone, each more frantic than the last. Boyd had attempted to flee the state, only to be stopped at the airport by federal agents investigating the fraudulent loans. Trevor and Madison had both received visits from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. But Frank's plan was far more intricate than they'd yet discovered. He'd spent 6 months creating a complex web of shell companies, all legally registered, all designed to ensnare Rita and Boyd in their own greed. Every forged signature they'd used, every false document they'd created, had been traced back to specific criminal acts that carried federal penalties. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he'd been expecting. Mr. Delacroix? This is Detective Sarachon with the city police. We have Rita Delacroix in custody. She's asking to speak with you. Frank smiled for the first time in weeks. What are the charges? Multiple counts of forgery, identity theft, and bank fraud. But we think there's more. She claims you set her up, but the evidence suggests she and her co-conspirator Boyd Hutchins orchestrated an elaborate fraud scheme using your identity. I'll be right there. The police station was familiar territory for Frank. He'd consulted with law enforcement agencies throughout his career, helping them understand criminal psychology and interrogation techniques. Now those skills were serving him personally. Rita sat in the interrogation room, looking haggard and desperate. When Frank entered with his attorney, her eyes blazed with fury. You bastard, she hissed. You planned this whole thing. Frank sat down calmly across from her. I signed the papers you gave me. I left quietly. What happens after that is simply the natural consequence of your choices. The loans you took out in my name, the shell companies, the fake accounts, you created all of that to frame me. Frank's attorney leaned forward. My client has never taken out unauthorized loans or created false accounts. The evidence shows that you and Mr. Hutchins forged his signature on multiple financial instruments. The companies you borrowed from are all legitimate businesses with proper legal standing. But the timing, Rita started. The timing of what? Frank asked. The timing of you deciding to commit fraud? The timing of you choosing to forge my signature? The timing of you planning to steal my assets through false documentation? Rita's face crumpled. Where are my children? What have you done to Trevor and Madison? They're adults, Frank said. They made their own choices. Trevor accepted money from offshore accounts to support your fraud. Madison helped create false financial records. They're facing their own legal consequences. They're your children. Frank's expression didn't change. No, My children wouldn't have betrayed me. My children wouldn't have helped you destroy me. The people calling themselves Trevor and Madison are strangers who happen to share my DNA. Rita began to cry, but Frank felt nothing. He'd buried his emotions for her months ago, when he'd first discovered her betrayal. "Frank, please," she whispered. "I made a mistake. I was scared about money, about the future. Boyd convinced me." "Stop." Frank's voice cut through her pleading. "You made a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to involve our children in your betrayal. You chose to commit crimes using my identity. Every consequence you're facing is the direct result of those choices." He stood to leave, but Rita grabbed his arm. "What happens now?" Frank looked down at her hand on his arm, and she quickly released it. "Now you face federal charges for bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Boyd faces similar charges, plus charges in 3 other states for similar schemes he's run before. Trevor and Madison will likely face reduced charges if they cooperate with investigators." Rita's face went pale. "Other states? Did you really think you were Boyd's first victim? He's been running this same scheme for years, seducing wealthy women, manipulating them into financial fraud, then disappearing when things got complicated. You were just the latest mark." Frank turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Rita, the house you thought you were taking? The mortgage payments you've been making for the past 3 weeks? They've been going to one of my companies. Thank you for keeping up with the payments." As Frank left the police station, he felt the same calm satisfaction he'd experienced after successful military operations. Phase 1 was complete. Rita and Boyd were facing serious federal charges. Trevor and Madison were learning that actions have consequences. But Frank wasn't finished. There were still debts to be paid, and Frank Delacroix always collected what was owed to him. Chapter 6: The Reckoning Begins. The federal courthouse was a monument to justice, its marble columns and brass fixtures gleaming under the morning sun. Frank sat in the gallery, watching as Rita and Boyd were led in wearing orange jumpsuits, their hands shackled. 6 months had passed since his retirement ceremony. Rita had been denied bail after prosecutors argued she was a flight risk. Boyd had attempted to flee twice, once making it as far as Mexico before being extradited back. Trevor and Madison sat in the front row with their court-appointed attorneys, both having agreed to testify against their mother and Boyd in exchange for reduced sentences. They looked older, broken by the weight of their choices. Frank's attorney, Marcus Thornfield, leaned over and whispered, "The prosecutor says Rita wants to make a deal. She's willing to plead guilty to all charges if you'll speak on her behalf at sentencing." Frank's expression remained neutral. "No. She's claiming the affair was just a mistake, that Boyd manipulated her into the financial fraud. Irrelevant. Frank, she's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Boyd's looking at even more." Frank turned to look at his attorney. "Marcus, I spent 25 years defending this country from people who betrayed it. I've never shown mercy to traitors, and I'm not starting now." The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Walsh, called her first witness, Frank himself. As Frank took the stand, he looked directly at Rita. She mouthed the word, "please," but he might as well have been looking at a stranger. "Mr. Delacroix," Prosecutor Walsh began, "can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendants?" "Rita Delacroix was my wife for 22 years. Boyd Hutchins was her business partner and, as I later discovered, her lover. Trevor and Madison Delacroix are my biological children." "Can you describe how you discovered the fraud scheme?" Frank's testimony was methodical and devastating. He detailed how he'd uncovered the affair, the forged documents, the false financial records. He explained how Rita and Boyd had used his military credentials to secure loans, forged his signature on multiple documents, and involved his children in their conspiracy. "The defendants believed they were manipulating me," Frank said. "In reality, they were revealing their true character. I simply documented their crimes and allowed the legal system to take its course." Rita's attorney, a nervous young man clearly out of his depth, tried to cross-examine Frank. "Mr. Delacroix, isn't it true that you orchestrated this entire scenario to frame my client?" Frank's stare could have frozen fire. Your client forged my signature on loan documents. Your client created false financial records. Your client committed identity theft. These are crimes she chose to commit. I simply ensured there was evidence of her choices. But you set up the shell companies. I set up legitimate businesses through proper legal channels. The fact that your client chose to defraud those businesses doesn't make me responsible for her crimes. When Boyd's attorney tried a similar approach, Frank's response was even more devastating. Mr. Hutchins has committed similar fraud in Nevada, California, and Arizona, targeting wealthy women and manipulating them into financial crimes. He saw my wife as another mark. The fact that she willingly participated doesn't make her a victim. It makes her a co-conspirator. After 3 days of testimony, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. On the count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud, we find the defendant Rita Delacroix guilty. On the count of identity theft, we find the defendant Rita Delacroix guilty. On the count of forgery, we find the defendant Rita Delacroix guilty. The pattern repeated for all charges against both Rita and Boyd. Trevor and Madison received suspended sentences and probation in exchange for their cooperation, but they were now convicted felons. At sentencing, Rita was given 18 years in federal prison. Boyd received 25 years, with additional time for his previous crimes in other states. As the bailiffs led them away, Rita looked back at Frank one last time. Her expression was pleading, desperate, seeking some sign of the man she'd once manipulated. Frank's face remained expressionless. As far as he was concerned, Rita Delacroix had died the day she betrayed him. The woman being led away in shackles was just a criminal paying for her crimes. Chapter 7. Settling all accounts. 2 years after the trial, Frank stood in the conference room of his private security firm, Delacroix Strategic Solutions. The company had grown rapidly, built on Frank's reputation and the contacts he'd made during his military career. His assistant, Lucy, knocked and entered. "Mr. Delacroix, Trevor is here to see you." Frank didn't look up from his files. "I'm not available." "Sir, he says it's about his mother. She's been hospitalized." Frank finally looked up. "Send him in. 5 minutes." Trevor entered looking haggard and desperate. Prison had been hard on Rita, and the stress was showing on their son as well. "Dad, please," Trevor began. "Mom's had a heart attack. The doctors say the stress of prison is killing her. She needs medical care that the prison can't provide." Frank gestured to a chair, but remained standing. "Sit." Trevor sat, looking more like a supplicant than a son. "Dad, I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you, but she's dying, and—" Trevor's face crumpled. "Please, Dad, I'm begging you. Use your influence. Get her transferred to a medical facility. Help her." Frank walked to the window overlooking the city. His company occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, a symbol of how far he'd risen since his retirement. "Trevor, you made your choice 2 years ago. You chose to help your mother destroy me. You chose to accept money from fraudulent accounts. You chose to laugh at my expense. Those choices have consequences. But she's your wife." "No." Frank turned around, his voice cold as Arctic wind. "She was my wife. The woman in prison is a convicted felon who committed crimes against me. You want me to show mercy to someone who showed me none?" Trevor stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. What happened to forgiveness? What happened to family? Frank walked over to his desk and picked up a photograph. It was from his retirement ceremony, showing Rita, Trevor, and Madison smiling as they presented him with a gift they'd given him knowing they were about to destroy his life. "Family doesn't betray family," Frank said quietly. "Family doesn't laugh at family's destruction. Family doesn't commit crimes against family. The people in this photograph were never my family. They were actors playing roles, waiting for the right moment to strike." He set the photograph down. "Your mother chose her path. You chose yours. Now live with the consequences." Trevor's desperation turned to rage. "You're a monster. She loved you." Frank's expression didn't change. "She loved my money. She loved my status. She loved the life I provided. She never loved me. If she had, she wouldn't have betrayed me." "Fine," Trevor said, standing. "But what about Madison? She's struggling, Dad. She can't find work with a felony record. She's living in a studio apartment, working minimum wage jobs. She was just a kid when this happened. Frank walked back to his desk and sat down. Madison was 19 years old, an adult capable of making adult decisions. She chose to help you and your mother commit crimes. She chose to laugh at my destruction. She chose to help plan my financial ruin. He opened a file on his desk. According to my investigators, Madison is currently working 3 jobs to pay rent on a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood. She's applied to 47 companies in the past 6 months and been rejected by all of them due to her criminal record. Trevor looked shocked. You've been monitoring her? I monitor all threats to my security. That includes people who have committed crimes against me, regardless of their DNA. Frank closed the file. Your 5 minutes are up. Trevor didn't move. Dad, please. I'm asking you to be human. Frank stood and walked to the door, opening it. I'm being human. I'm being the kind of human who doesn't forgive betrayal. I'm being the kind of human who holds traitors accountable for their actions. I'm being the kind of human who learned that mercy is weakness when dealing with people who would destroy you. As Trevor walked to the door, Frank spoke one final time. Trevor, you want forgiveness? You want mercy? You should have thought about that before you chose to betray me. Actions have consequences. You're living with yours now. After Trevor left, Frank returned to his desk. He'd built a new life from the ashes of his old one, and it was better than anything he'd had before. His company was thriving. His reputation was sterling. He was wealthy, powerful, and free from the people who'd tried to destroy him. Rita was dying in prison. Boyd was serving his sentence in maximum security. Trevor and Madison were struggling with the consequences of their choices. Frank felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but he felt no sympathy either. They made their choices. Now they were living with the results. Chapter 8. The Last Visit. The federal prison was a fortress of concrete and steel, surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Frank had been here before, consulting on security matters for the government. He'd never imagined he'd be visiting as someone's husband. Rita lay in the prison hospital, connected to monitors and 4 lines. She looked 20 years older than her actual age, her hair gray and thin, her face gaunt. Prison had not been kind to her. She looked up as Frank entered, her eyes filling with tears. Frank, she whispered. You came. Frank pulled up a chair, but didn't sit close to the bed. The warden called. He said you were dying. Rita tried to smile. I guess I am. The doctors say my heart is failing. Too much stress, they say. Frank said nothing. Frank, I need to tell you something. About Boyd. About everything. I know everything I need to know. Rita shook her head weakly. No, you don't. Boyd, he showed me pictures. Pictures of you with other women during your deployments. He said you've been cheating on me for years. He said you never loved me, that I was just convenient. Frank's expression didn't change. There were no other women. I know that now, Rita said, tears streaming down her face. I know the pictures were fake. I know Boyd manipulated me. But at the time, I believed him. I thought you'd been lying to me our entire marriage. Frank stood up. It doesn't matter. It does matter. Rita's voice gained strength. I loved you, Frank. I really did love you. I was just scared. Scared that you'd leave me. Scared that I'd wasted my life on someone who didn't care about me. Frank walked to the window, looking out at the prison yard where inmates were exercising. Rita, even if Boyd showed you fake pictures, even if you believed I was cheating, that doesn't justify fraud. That doesn't justify forging my signature on loan documents. That doesn't justify involving our children in a scheme to destroy me. I know, Rita whispered. I know it was wrong. I know I hurt you in ways I can never fix. Frank turned back to face her. You didn't just hurt me, Rita. You betrayed me. You took our children, our own children, and turned them into accomplices in your crime. You made them laugh at my pain. You made them participants in my destruction. Rita closed her eyes. I was angry. I was hurt. I wanted to hurt you back. And you succeeded. Frank walked back to the chair, but didn't sit down. Rita, you want absolution. You want me to forgive you, so you can die in peace. But I'm not a priest, and this isn't a confessional. You made choices. Those choices destroyed our family, destroyed our children's futures, and nearly destroyed me. Frank, please. You want to know what hurts the most? Frank's voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. It's not the affair. It's not even the fraud. It's that you made our children into monsters. Trevor and Madison were good kids before you poisoned them against me. You turned them into criminals. You destroyed their lives along with yours. Rita was sobbing now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Frank stood by her bedside, looking down at the woman who'd shared his life for 22 years, the woman who'd given him 2 children, the woman who'd betrayed him more completely than any enemy he'd ever faced. Rita, I'm not here to forgive you. I'm not here to offer comfort. I'm here to tell you something important. She looked up at him hopefully. Your choices have consequences. Trevor is working night shifts in a warehouse, struggling to pay rent. Madison is cleaning offices at night because no one will hire a convicted felon during the day. They're both broken people, struggling with addiction and depression. Rita's face went pale. Addiction. Trevor's been arrested twice for possession. Madison's been in rehab 3 times. Your choices didn't just destroy you, they destroyed them too. Frank turned to leave. Frank, wait, Rita called out desperately. What about Mercy? What about the man I married? The man who believed in second chances? Frank paused at the door. That man died the day his wife and children served him divorce papers at his retirement ceremony. The man you're talking to now is someone different, someone harder, someone who learned that mercy is a luxury he can't afford. He opened the door, then looked back one final time. Goodbye, Rita. As Frank walked down the prison corridor, he heard her calling his name, but he didn't turn back. He'd said what he came to say. There was nothing left between them now but the consequences of her choices. Chapter 9. The Final Victory. Frank stood in his office 5 years after his retirement ceremony, looking out at the city sprawling below him. Delacroix Strategic Solutions now occupied an entire building, employing over 200 people and generating tens of millions in revenue annually. His assistant knocked and entered. Mr. Delacroix, there's been a development. Frank turned from the window. What kind of development? Rita Delacroix died last night. Heart failure. The prison warden called this morning. Frank nodded once. Thank you for letting me know. His assistant hesitated. Sir, there's more. Boyd Hutchins was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent suicide. Frank felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, no sense of closure. Rita and Boyd were simply problems that had solved themselves. Also, his assistant continued, Trevor and Madison have both requested meetings with you. Separately, Frank walked to his desk and sat down. Schedule them for tomorrow. 15 minutes each. The next day, Madison entered his office first. She looked tired, worn down by years of struggling with the consequences of her choices. But there was something different about her, a kind of resigned maturity that hadn't been there before. Dad, she said quietly, sitting across from his desk. Madison, I heard about Mom. I wanted to thank you. Frank raised an eyebrow. Thank me? Madison nodded. For not helping her. For not showing mercy. For letting us face the consequences of what we did. Frank said nothing, waiting. I've been going to therapy, Madison continued. Real therapy, not court-ordered. I've been trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could laugh at their father's pain. How I could participate in destroying you. She took a deep breath. The therapist says I was never really your daughter. I was Mom's puppet. I did what she wanted because it was easier than thinking for myself. But that's not an excuse. I made choices. Bad choices. Frank's expression remained neutral. Yes, you did. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Madison said. I'm not asking for help. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand that you're not my father anymore, and I'm not your daughter. We're just 2 people who used to know each other. She stood up. I also wanted you to know that I'm doing okay. Not great, but okay. I'm clean. I have a job. I have a small apartment. I'm paying my own way for the first time in my life. Frank looked at her for a long moment. Good. Madison walked to the door, then paused. Dad? Frank? I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you for building all this, for not letting us destroy you, for being stronger than we were. After Madison left, Trevor entered. He looked worse than his sister, older, harder, with the look of a man who'd lost too many battles. She's dead, Trevor said without preamble. I know. Trevor sat down heavily. I hated you for a long time. Blamed you for everything. Blamed you for Mom's death, for Madison's problems, for my own failures. Frank waited. But I've had time to think. 5 years of thinking. And I realized something. Trevor looked up at Frank. You didn't destroy us. We destroyed ourselves. We made the choice to betray you. We made the choice to laugh at your pain. We made the choice to help Mom commit crimes. Trevor's voice cracked slightly. I've been jealous of you, you know that? Jealous that you survived what we did to you. Jealous that you built something better. Jealous that you moved on while we're still trapped by what we did. Frank's expression didn't change. Jealousy is a choice too. Trevor laughed bitterly. Yeah, it is. Just like everything else. He stood up. I'm not asking for anything, Frank. I'm not asking for forgiveness or help or a second chance. I'm just here to tell you that you won. Completely. Absolutely. Trevor walked toward the door, then turned back. You want to know the worst part? The part that really destroys me? It's not that we lost. It's that we deserved to lose. We deserved everything that happened to us. As Trevor left, Frank returned to his window. The city stretched out below him, full of possibilities and opportunities. He'd built a new life from nothing, surrounded himself with loyal employees and trusted associates. He was wealthy, successful, and free. Rita was dead. Boyd was dead. Trevor and Madison were broken remnants of their former selves, struggling to survive in a world that had no place for them. Frank had won, but victory tasted like ash. Not because he regretted his actions. He didn't. Not because he felt guilty. He felt nothing. Victory tasted like ash because winning had required